All right, I think we should begin just because we've only got an hour together, so I think it would be a good time to start. So welcome to this last session in our 4-part webinar series. We're part of Bath University's Centre for Cultural and Creative Industries and the Narrative and Emerging Technologies Lab. And through this series, we've been offering an in-depth of AI's emerging influence across writing and publishing across multiple fields. So we've invited many speakers and we've been looking at AI from multiple perspectives. We're also part of the wider My World programme, which is leading on creative innovation in the Southwest. My name's Amy Spencer. I'm a researcher at Bath University, and I'm going to be chairing this session. So in this webinar, we have 4 speakers. We have Gadney, Sarah Gibson-Yates, Doug Specht, and we have, I haven't made a note of Robin's surname on here. Robin, we will introduce you in a second. Sorry, my notes were a little scrappy. So in this session, we're going to be thinking about the use of AI in screenwriting. So we've got researchers, industry professionals together to talk about how AI tools have the potential to develop complex characters, develop dialogue, and identify structural issues. If you've got any questions during the session, please add them to the Q&A, and we will have questions at the end. So I'm going to invite Doug to speak first. Doug Specht is a reader in cultural geography and communication and head of the School of Media and Communication at the University of Westminster. His research explores how data and technologies influence environmental justice, human rights, and access to education, with a focus on the production and codification of knowledge. He writes for publications such as Wonk HE, The Conversation, Geographical, and for the Times Higher Education. He's a co-author of the upcoming volume, The Student Guide to the Creative Studio in the Digital Age. So big welcome to Doug, who's going to speak on this topic. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And so it's always odd hearing your own biography being read out, isn't it? But thank you very much for the kind introduction. Let me just start sharing some slides here. Can't do storytelling without some images when we're talking about script to screen, can we? So hopefully you can see those slides without too much problem. So good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak on this topic. I think I'm probably going to start us off with some quite broad ideas around AI and creativity, AI and the interaction between how we think creatively, which I hope will then feed nicely into the other talks that might delve a bit more into the details of script and screen and that kind of writing. Well, you'll see I'm starting here my title slide with a small clip from Contact, the film adaptation of Carl Sagan's book. And this is the moment that Jodie Foster's character is confronted with the uncontainable wonder of the universe. And in this scene, I didn't dare try and make sound work across the internet, even in this day and age. In this scene, as she beholds the size of the universe, the glory of the universe, she exclaims, "They should have sent a poet rather than an astronaut." And I think this is a really interesting way for us to start thinking about artificial intelligence and thinking about the modern world that we live in. Because, of course, actually, the birth of artificial intelligence, the birth of the computer, is itself wrapped up in poetry. The invention of which, which is attributed, of course, to Ada Lovelace and Charles Babbage. Babbage has his own story, but it's Lovelace who really leads us nicely into thinking about AI. And what's interesting about Ada Lovelace, you may well know that her father, of course, was Lord Byron. She didn't really know him. He died when she was 8 years old. She was raised by her mother, who was very adamant that all of her father's influence should be erased from her life. And so from the age of about 4 years old, her mother banned her from engaging with anything sort of poetic and instead took her down a route of maths and science. And she became quite fascinated by mechanical engineering. She wrote the book that these pictures are from, about constructing flying apparatus. But all this time while she was doing these things, she felt that part of her, the poetic part, was being somewhat repressed. And she wrote to her mother in her teenage years, "You will not concede me philosophical poetry. Invert the order. Will you give me poetical philosophy, poetical science?" This idea of poetry ran deeply through her thinking mechanically as well. And through this, Anna Lovelace really appreciated the concept of the general purpose computing machine. She could envisage that this could be something beyond just processing numbers, but something that could also process symbolic notations, including music and artistic ones. And she saw a poetry in this idea, and she set out to encourage others to see that as well. But she was under no illusion about the limits here. She said that the analytical engine has no pretensions whatever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. It can follow analysis, but it has no power of anticipating any analytical relations or truths. She stated that no computer, no matter how powerful, would ever truly be a thinking machine. And a century after this, Alan Turing dubbed this Lady Lovelace's objection and tried to dismiss this. Turing himself laid the foundations, as we know, for artificial intelligence. His famous Turing test asked whether a computer could ever enjoy strawberries and cream or compel you to fall in love with it. But Turing's ideas lead us to even more questions. Diane Ackerman, herself a poet, asks whether when robots weep, who will comfort them? Ackerman notes that our relationship with nature is evolving rapidly, but also incrementally, and at times so subtly that we don't perceive the sonic booms literally or metaphorically. As we're redefining our perception of the world surrounding us and the world inside of us, we are revising our fundamental ideas about exactly what it means to be human and what we deem to be natural. And to this end, I would argue that we are reinventing the human race right now. The pace of scientific progress is directly correlated to our alliance and allegiance with digital machines. Sean Carroll offers us an interesting idea when he states that we're all machines that think, and the distinction between different types of machines is eroding. We pay a lot of attention these days, with good reason, to artificial machines and intelligences, ones constructed by human ingenuity. But the natural ones that have evolved through natural selection, like you and me, are still around. And one of the most exciting frontiers in technology and cognition is the increasingly permeable boundary between these two categories. And I think that's where we then start to develop some really exciting, but potentially unnerving moments in writing, in script writing, in film, in television, and in the creative industry in general. Where this becomes complicated is around our idea of what computation is. The whole idea of computation is that once we have a complete step-by-step account of any process, we can program it on a computer. And we tend to think about the human brain that way. Computation is still the best and probably really the only scientific explanation we have of how an object like the brain can act intelligently. But it doesn't really tell us how the brain works. It has no way to really explain to us how we see creativity, particularly the kind of creativity that we see in children. It cannot be translated in that way. And until we actually manage to understand that and create computers that think the way that humans think rather than emulating through step-by-step processes, the largest and most powerful computers will still be no match for the smallest and weakest human beings, by which I refer to the creativity of children. Because thinking is not computation, it is cognition, it is contemplation. And this inevitably leads to imagination. And imagination is how we elevate the real towards the ideal. It requires a moral framework of what is ideal. And in order to become scriptwriters, creatives, filmmakers, producers, we need the imagination that comes through cognition and contemplation. The most important thing about making machines that can think, says Kevin Kelly, the founder of Wired magazine, is that they can and will think differently. We believe that human intelligence is singular, but it is not. There is a possibility that there are other types of intelligence in the world. And as we continue to build synthetic minds, we'll come to realize that human thinking isn't general, but is actually just one species of thinking. The kind of thinking done by today's emerging AIs is not at all like human thinking. But that's not necessarily a problem when we consider it to be a companion to human thinking. And much of the work around thinking about AI as a companion to human thinking looks at the idea of using AI to take over certain parts of human life, the drudgery of the dullness of life. What's wrong with turning over the drudgery of thought to high-tech marvels, asked Daniel Dennett. Well, nothing, he concludes, so long as we don't delude ourselves and we somehow manage to keep our own cognitive skills. But what we must also remember is that by outsourcing the drudgery, we outsource some of those sources of inspiration and creativity. Out of adversity comes creativity, of course. If we look at the work of Rachel Carson from her text, Silent Spring, she gives us a glimpse as to where this might go. She says the future offers very little hope for those who expect that our new mechanical slaves will offer us a world in which we may rest from thinking. Help us they may, but at the cost of supreme demands upon our honesty and our intelligence. The world of the future will be an ever more demanding struggle against the limitations of our intelligence, not a comfortable hammock in which we can lie down and be waited upon by our robot slaves. And I think that really touches at the tensions between using artificial intelligence and harnessing it as a companion or as a complete tool in the creative enterprise. And just by way of rounding that up, I want to share a debate between a couple of well-known people. Nearly 2 centuries after Ada Lovelace wrote the first algorithm, Yuval Harari wrote in his book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, that artificial intelligence, with its limitless potential and connectedness, will ultimately render humans redundant in the workplace. And we see that now. It's entirely feasible to many people. It doesn't sound overly feasible at all, but to many it does. But what's more concerning is not the debate as to whether humans can be replaced, I think, is his assertion in this text that AI will be able to write better than humans can. And in his example, he was talking about writing music specifically, apply it to script, to novels, to any type of writing whatsoever. He says we listen to songs to make us feel certain ways. We can read books to feel certain ways. We watch films to feel certain ways. And that in future, AI will simply map to the individual mind and create songs or texts that are tailored exclusively to our own particular mental algorithms that can make us feel with far more intensity and precision whatever we want to feel. Now, this, of course, is something that Ada Lovelace herself said could not be possible. On the flip side of this argument, and where I sit perhaps more closely, is Nick Cave's response to this assertion. Because he says this isn't all that songs do. And I would argue it's not all that writing does. It's not all that film does, nor television, or scripts, or any kind of creative endeavor. Of course, songs do make us feel something, happy, sad, sexy, homesick, excited, or whatever, he said. But it is not all a song does. What a great song does is fill us with a sense of awe. There is a reason for this. A sense of awe is most exclusively predicated on our limitations as human beings. It is entirely to do with our audacity as humans to reach beyond our potential, which is the awe of artificial intelligence, but not the awe that artificial intelligence can mimic. If we have a limitless potential, then what is there to transcend? And therefore, what is the purpose of imagination? AI, we agree, will have the capacity to write a good song, but it will never write a great one because it lacks the nerve. And just a little plug for a short article I wrote related to this series of talks. I was looking at The Brutalist and the way that AI was used there and how this made people feel uncomfortable. It took us not into the dialogue more, but out of it. as we took away the awe and wonder of the human and replaced it with awe of what technology could do. And many have talked about how that took us out of the film and caused this great controversy around the use of AI in the film The Brutalist. So I shall conclude by sharing that Alan Turing, Ada Lovelace, they laid the foundations of the perplexities of AI as a creative thing with their central questions around poetry and the machine and questioning whether a machine can think. But it's impossible for us to think about the implications for writing, whether that's text, music, film, video, whatever, without building upon those ideas and asking, can machines and can algorithms ever actually feel? And I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a great introduction to what we're speaking about today. Thank you very, very much. We're going to move on to our next speaker. We have Sarah Gibson-Yates, who is a senior lecturer in film, media and writing within the Cambridge School of Creative Industries at Anglia Ruskin University here in the UK. Her research reflects an interest in multidisciplinary creative practice and the ideas around film, writing and creativity. Her current work reflects the urgency to better understand the value and creative potential of working with AI technologies. Other research includes AI's impact on sustainability and nature and the potential of entangled creative practices for understanding society and culture in permacrisis. So over to you, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Sarah, you're on mute.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I just said a quick thanks. Sorry, I just realized before I shared my PowerPoint that I needed to unmute and put my camera back on. So yeah, I was just saying thank you for the invitation and thanks for the series, which has been great. So today I'm going to just share briefly how I worked on an AI with AI on a recent screenwriting and filmmaking project funded by the British Academy with support from my institution. So I'm going to introduce a summary of the main aims and insights that I got from the project, show a short clip from the film to kind of illustrate the screenplay as it became on screen, and then just a couple of brief words about some of the creative processes, creative decisions that I worked through with AI around that. So this is the project. A Little of the Heart was the screenplay that I wrote, a short drama film that was made from an experimental screenwriting process using generative AI, particularly working with Claude, ChatGPT, and Google Gemini. So from early experiments following GPT's launch in November 22, I found the back and forth, prompt and response, critical reflective loop of working with chatbots very similar to the drafting and revision process of my own creative writing and academic writing. So I felt like there was something there interesting there going on that might be useful for developing my own creative practice and wanted to explore this further. About the same time, I also identified what I perceived to be a kind of a situation arising within the film industry that seemed to indicate two kind of opposite or contradictory directions of travel. One was around increased automation, as an impact of AI, particularly on screenwriting, prompted by the screenwriters' strikes during the summer of 2023. So obviously this is raising urgent questions for everybody around authenticity, bias, IP, industry working practices, and job security. And then the flip side of that, I kind of was noticing also around this recent establishment of a code of care within screen production, particularly around the formation of the role of the intimacy coordinator who facilitates and choreographs intimate scenes in film, TV, and theatre, ensuring actors' safety and consent. So it seemed these two movements seemed quite contradictory, one around automation of creative working practices and the other one around more situated human-centered way of working. So with this wider context in mind, to my own kind of personal interest in exploring the technology based on kind of work I'd done in my PhD, looking at the languages and practices of social media, I was already kind of very interested in technology and storytelling and how those two shaped and informed each other. I made a British Academy funding application and got a bit of money to support this project. So A Little of the Heart set out to investigate the entangled post-digital interactions that occur when human and machines interlocutors in screenwriting and in the intimate moment of therapeutic exchange with AI chatbots. I actually came across this article by Evan and Ringrose very recently, last month. And interestingly, it kind of predicts the work that I was doing last year. I was aware of their work in post-digital intimacy before this, but they've kind of really formulated their ideas for this as a theoretical framework, which I think is quite interesting and chimes a lot with the work I've been doing and hope to do going forwards. So the work itself draws on combinatory literary techniques and traditional screenwriting processes, try to bring those together, and responds to calls for new narratives, exploring our everyday relationships with AI. So rather than looking at AI from the point of view of science fiction narratives, I was looking at how do we bring narratives around the realist narratives around the everyday, looking at AI. And the project aims to sort of posit new ways of generating contemporary screen stories about, with, and through AI. Clarke's notion of creative amplification informed the iterative human-machine dialogues that shaped the screenwriting process. This process consisted in conversations around ideation, log lines, scene development, synopsis writing, and dialogue, where I ran ideas essentially through chatbot dialogue mechanisms, assessing the work via a combination of intuition, aesthetic aims, past experience of what works and what doesn't work for screen drama, in my opinion, and according to various other models for story structure and also dramaturgy I looked at. And then added to what I saw as gaps or missing pieces or failings in those results in various different ways. So, which I also found this kind of idea of story construction through a process of filling in gaps. The idea that you have, you start with an idea and then you kind of flesh out that idea and you build it up through various different mechanisms. So essentially, I created space for inspiration to fill these gaps using the usual writerly resources such as serendipity, dreaming, imagination, free association, and improvisation. In addition to conversations with humans, of course, cast, crew, friends, and a script editor that I got involved as a result of the funding I received. So all of these things are the normal way that ideas develop. And I'm kind of interested in how the genesis of ideas, screen ideas particularly, come to play. And not much has been written about this. So in this way, I was able to add the necessary detail, plot points, thematic development I needed or wanted. These human contributions are particularly effective at providing the screen, imaginary, and audio design that I wish to carry much of the weight of the storytelling in the realization of a poetic realist style of filmmaking that I wanted to achieve. So the resulting combinatory screenplay, which is a hybrid really of human and machine input, and that's very much the kind of the nature of the project. I was trying to negotiate that kind of space between the affordances and limitations of what those AI tools could provide. Anyway, the story tells the tale of a young woman holding trauma from a past relationship who turns to AI for advice. An AI chatbot. The ensuing film includes a real-time conversation with an AI chatbot and explores the contradictions inherent in asking a computational device for help with matters of the heart, while also exploring AI's capacity to respond appropriately to the intimate, personal, embodied experiences of the protagonist. Okay, so I'm going to just show you a short clip from the film. So I think this sort of illustrates, let me move this over here, illustrates what I'm talking about.
Should there be sound? There were someone in the chat has mentioned they can't hear anything, and I wasn't sure whether there was sound in this extract of the.
Yeah, there was. We checked it before. It seemed to work okay. Okay, is it not coming through?
I can't hear it.
Trying to get someone you like to notice you can be
Yeah, now.
a good way to get someone you like to notice you.
I have put it up
Start a conversation
as high
about
as I
something
can on
that
my.
Yeah, no, we can. I can hear it now.
you both like that you can connect on. That's great. Do you like them too? Why don't you tell them you like this band? You can also ask which is their favorite song. That would be a great way to start a conversation. That's so true. It can feel really awkward trying to get to know someone for the first time, but just imagine how great it could be to get to know someone new. There are lots of ways to get over feeling shy. Time to make a memorable first impression.
Okay, I'll pause it there. Okay, so the rest of the scene, so that's sort of Nia continues to share her anxieties in the rest of that scene. It's a little bit longer than that. So it's not the full end of the scene. So she shares her anxieties with the chatbot about starting a new relationship. And the scene occurs sort of midpoint really in the film, which is 13 minutes long, after we have been introduced to Nia and her love interest, and marks the point where she must decide to speak to him or not. The conversation with the chatbot provides a catalyst for self-reflection and self-understanding. She doesn't take the chatbot's advice directly in the end, but uses this in between digital and human recursive space to reflect on what she is comfortable doing. She is aware that the chatbot's suggestions for action do not share her embodied experience or hold the emotional trauma of a difficult past relationship and the doubt that accompanies thoughts of starting a new one. The conversation on screen was improvised with a real chatbot, Snapchat in fact, and prevented verbatim or practically. As you be aware, chatbots tend to be very verbose and often too long answers. So I ended up cutting down a little bit of some of their responses. You also note that I adapted the textual conversation into a partial audio exchange. So while I wrote this conversation in the screenplay as a text chat, as you can see on the screen now on my slide, when it came to thinking about filming the scene, and obviously my perspective as director, knowing that I was going to direct and produce this film, informed how I work with AI at the screenwriting process. I knew that that wasn't really going to work. It was going to be too much text on screen with an undesired effect of slacking the dramatic tension and distancing viewers potentially emotionally from the scene. So presenting the AI agent as a voice afforded me new creative opportunities when thinking about the visual and sound design of this scene, specifically whose voice it should be. We decided to use Nia's own voice, the actor who played Nia's own voice, adding a filter to mechanize its audio texture, using the same actor's voice drew interesting parallels between the therapeutic role of the AI chatbot and that of Nia's internal processes of self-reflection, effectively merging the two. Visually, we included Nia's side of the chat in text boxes, complete with emojis, a dialogue trait of Snapchat bots. Presenting AI as a character was a creative story solution and a response to the sometimes limited characterizations that have resulted through the prompting and revision process I'd explored with AI. So to conclude, what I've described here is a way of working with AI that is highly personal, but also aligns with traditional screen story development and screenwriting processes, using AI as a deliberate constraint. I have gained a deeper understanding of the affordances and limitations of both sides of the experience that had tangible benefits for productivity. Within the context of the neoliberal university and late capitalism, I hesitate to name productivity as a virtue, as it's often overemphasized at the expense of other human-centered and caring practices. However, for me personally, increased creative productivity has been a good thing, and I will continue to work with it on AI on the next project, which is revising my PhD novel with and about and through so-called AI. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to hear a practitioner's perspective to begin to understand all of this. So thank you very much. We're going to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Gadney. He's CEO of Charisma.ai, which is at the forefront of creative AI. He has run 3 startups as well as working for international media and other organizations. So with Charisma.ai, Guy's transforming the use of AI in film, television, and video games, focusing on the power of good storytelling and bridging the gap between the creative and technology industries. Guy's on Innovate UK's Bridge AI Advisory Board and on the board of the Oxford Story Museum, and is a co-founder of the Collaborative AI Consortium, where he researches the impact of AI on the creative industries. So thank you very much for being here today, Guy, and over to you.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. I will zoom through this quite quickly and hopefully help to put some useful links in. I won't go into too much background about me, other than I've known Amy and Kate for a little while now, and occasionally write for the writing platform, which is what I've just put into the chat. So Charisma.ai, both of them are the work that I spend time on. We started off looking at storytelling and AI probably about 10, 15 years ago. Yeah, we were working in AI and storytelling that far back. And about 4 years ago, we started working with the University of Southern California to see if we could come up with a universal character model. So looking at storytelling through the lens of characters rather than just narrative. And we've published 2 papers already, and the third one's just about to be published, which actually has a sort of GitHub link and everything that I can put into chat as well, which is looking at how you might have a persistent character within a persistent narrative run by AI. In essence, it boils down to 3 things: character, conversation, and context. Context is the bit that is the hardest because there is so much of real world experience and demographic changes and geolocation and culture that we have in our biases around context that is important. So you can't just throw the whole lot to an LLM, I suppose, is the short piece. We've explored a lot quotes like Kurt Vonnegut's, "There's no reason the simple shape of stories cannot be fed into computers." I love this quote because there's one key word that leaps out at me, which is the word simple. we can feed the simple shapes of stories into computers, but not necessarily complex ones. And one of the key findings that we've found around using LLMs for stories is that they are lousy at subtext. They abhor a vacuum and they just want to fill it, which makes things like dramatic pauses quite hard. But this is what we've been working on for the last little while. And when we then throw in things like interactivity, a story can be incredibly complex. It's not just this single narrative that has a beginning, middle, and an end, but you will veer off up and down this sort of half pipe that we use the analogy of a lot. And that when you have user interaction with that for interactive stories, things get more complicated as well. And it's what we spend a lot of our time looking at. So Charismatic was a project that started just over a year ago, like 2 days over a year ago, funded by Innovate UK and with University of Falmouth and Creative Computing Institute at University of Arts London as our academic partners, Channel 4 and Aardman Animations as our primary industry partners. And it was really looking at whether or not we can feed in something as simple as a title and maybe a log line into a system and create, in essence, a visual and compelling story. So what you're seeing here is an output that I did the other day for a story. The first step we do is that we write all of the characters, all the stories, the context and everything that was talked about, and then we visualize it in a sort of two-dimensional, what we call a read-through mode. So you've got the script playing on the right-hand side, you've got the story being visualized on the left, and this is for writers to see how that story is manifested, edit it, go back, change it. And part of the view that we want to do here was to allow people, especially underrepresented writers who may not have had the privilege of going through film school, indeed school at all, to get the story out of their head into some form of experiential piece very rapidly. We can then take that and put it in an animated system.
Graves, outside. What's the story there, bro?
Pets. All pets.
So this is a short animated horror piece we put together. We wanted myself horror.
Why are all the mirrors
horror
covered with
and
red
bad
paint?
in narratives are very difficult to do with standard LLMs.
Go on,
Or
Jude.
we can do
Wow,
sort
with
of
your
multiple
latest Get Rich
different
Quick
styles
scheme.
in animation or
Low-price snacks in
realism here. So from my perspective, the challenge I give myself the whole time is how do we avoid looking at the future through the rearview mirror? And how do we look at something which is sort of transformational in stories? There are lots of inspirations that we seek in this, but for us, the idea of fluid stories, of narratives that can change, evolve with different people's interactions is critical. And that is enabled by AI in ways that we haven't been able to do before. So in the interest of time, I will leave it there, but pick up any conversations in chat as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. I've spotted you've been answering a couple of questions in the Q&A, which is great. If anyone else wants to add any questions in there, we'll get to the end, but it's also great to have answers to those live as well. So thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation. Moving on to our fourth presentation of this afternoon, we have Robin Winfield-Smith, who is a stage, screen and XR director based as the founder of liminal and development research at the Hat-Trick Lab, where she specialises in the development of transmedia, spectacle, IP universes that harness emerging technologies in real-time, virtual production, spatial environments, Gen AI and more to engage audiences of the future through more immersive, interactive and embodied forms and experiences. Robin's 10-year background in theatre has seen her work for the Royal Shakespeare Company, the National Theatre Studio, and on internationally touring live cinema productions in Europe. Since her Claw Leadership Transform Fellowship in 2021, she's collaborated with companies ranging from Epic Games, Story Futures, and ILM, been commissioned by Screen Skills to develop specialist virtual production training, jointly won a Silver Beamer Award for her work on an interactive digital comedian prototype exploring the ethical implications of using Gen AI in the creative industries, and been awarded Innovate UK funding with which to shoot a 180 immersive film testing new workflows for spatial content creation. Robin is a regular keynote speaker and a consultant at cross-sector events. So thank you very much, Robin, and we're really pleased to have you here, and over to you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Robin needs to cut down her biog. I'm really pleased that everybody has covered all of the things that they have, because each speaker has, I think, brought into focus really different elements of a conversation around use of AI to create, to write. And I'm going to take yet another slightly different angle, and I'm going to try and go quickly because I'm aware of the time. So I'm not going to kind of list tools that could be used for things like writing or development visualization, that kind of thing. Instead, I'm going to talk about opportunities. I'm going to do that through a case study, because I think that audiences of the future, while still, of course, engaging with story and wanting practitioners to kind of help shape the entertainment experiences they have, and of course have a sense of collective viewing, I think people are wanting what Guy started to talk about, which is kind of greater immersion in worlds, greater control over how they watch and engage, greater interactivity, agency, and even embodiment. So happy to talk about things like that in the questions. And of course, there's a question about the next generation, whether they will be as interactive as we think they will be as the digitally native generation alpha. But the thing that I think is going to keep drawing people, whether for passive or active experiences, is transmedia storytelling. And I think that is predicated on the idea that there is a world people want to keep coming back to, and that there are characters they care about. So the project I want to talk about was something I worked on last year with both Hat Trick and Liminal, and it forms the basis of a larger project that my company's taking forward this year. So the project was an Innovate UK funded sprint. It was run through Digital Catapult and Target 3D, and we had a number of other partners, including All Seeing Eye, Meaning Machine, Alex Horton Design, and others. We all collaborated across a 5-week sprint to create a digital comedian prototype who would explore the ethical implications of harnessing generative AI in the creative industries. Now, what was interesting about this project was that I, as creative lead, was, of course, being asked for a character, a world, a story, a scene. I was being asked for kind of creative decisions on the characters' physical characteristics, their movements, their tone of voice, their energy, so on. Decisions about the environment in which we were going to meet them. But crucially, I was being asked for a script. But of course, a script is what was missing, because the idea was that this character was going to create that script live. So instead, I found myself writing a set of given circumstances and a character that would give rise to a story that would have the hand of the author all over it, but was not written by the author, and instead was kind of personalized to the viewer or the participant, just like an interactive, immersive theatre show might be, or an improvised stand-up show. So my background, as you've heard, is as a director. And so the creative challenge at hand here, it seemed to me to be no different to working with actors, whether scripted, devising, or improvising. We figure out a character's objective or intention, the actions they might play. We understand the given circumstances, dig into the character relationships, and research into areas that we might need to know more about, or think about particular themes, even think about like the stagecraft of the performance to give the audience the best experience, or prepare some anchors for the scene so that we do have a sense of where the story might go, and we can put in some prompts that might help it. And this is, something that we might then rehearse as well. If it's not an improvised performance, but something that needs to run again and again, then repetition might happen in the form of rehearsal. And all of this is exactly what we did with our composite character, so made up of many different elements and many different artists to create the character that we called Kyle, who was this digital comedian. I'll talk a bit about how we did this, but not in too much detail. So we prepared these pieces of information that I've described as a single prompt injection that went into a pipeline that then allowed us to drive the character. Again, I can talk about stuff in the questions, or you're welcome to contact me separately if you're interested in how that worked. And I'm glad that Guy is one of the speakers today, because I was going to name check Charisma.ai as being a company that is very good at understanding how do you put that information into the LLM, because as Guy has already said, it's not so simple as just putting it straight in. So we worked with a company called Meaning Machine, who prepared a prompt injection interface for us so that we could plug it into the pipeline that we were using. And what I was going to say about Charisma was, they're fantastic at choosing which LLM you might use for which character in your story and so on. I won't say too much more about them because they can speak for themselves. But the reason that I'm outlining this way of working during this session when we're talking about writing is that I think this is a really exciting form of writing that allows for emergent dialogue to take place between the character or characters and the participant. And it could really revolutionize the way we think about not just TV, but also games and even the relationship between TV and games and other forms beyond the two that I've just name-checked. It might be useful to highlight some of the challenges because they are the most interesting thing about any sprint like this. So of course you can't control what the character is going to say. So the prompt injection and the fine tuning which goes on underneath that prompt injection process, it makes it much more likely that the character might say what you want them to say. In other words, you create the world, the character, the set of practical elements that will enable your story to emerge, enable the dialogue that you kind of want. And there are lots of companies working on this exact idea that you want to create a sort of a premium and an author-led piece of work that allows for emergent dialogue between characters and audience, but can remain intact as something that you had, in inverted commas, planned. You need some mechanisms, of course, by which the character can learn the events that are happening during the interaction, as opposed to the facts that predate that interaction. And you can potentially hear from what I'm saying here that the vocabulary that we were working with during our sprint was borrowed straight out of the theatre world. So I'm using Katie Mitchell's late Stanislavskian approach of events and looking at intentions, things like that. LLMs are developing the ability to remember what has gone on in a chat, and I'd recommend checking out Sesame AI for really interesting conversational AI. But that's certainly an area of interest, and it gets more complex when you're writing a scene in which the topography and the physics of the world start to affect whether or not a character can see or hear things that are happening in that world. I'll finish here sort of by saying that I found the creative challenges that were set by the technical limitations, and we've heard this from other speakers today, these were infinitely freeing of my creative process on the Kai project. And I was working as a, part of a much larger team of people. Many more people came together to create this one character, which was an exciting way of working. There's a lot of emphasis on LLMs as research assistant, as kind of sounding board, and a lot of focus on the creation of images and videos using generative AI with prompting. But there's far less focus on this, I think, really exciting area of character development. And what's most thrilling about it is that of all the things that I was experimenting with within the kind of prompt injection, the dialogue instructions, the emotional range of the character, whether or not the character was being enabled to do an aside to an audience, out of all of the things that could have made the real difference to the content of what the character said in the scene in its kind of real world setting, the thing that made the difference was sample dialogue. And that, of course, is the job of the writer. I had to write an example of the style and tone of the character. I had to create the sentences that the character might say, and then sort of train that character on its own greatest hits gradually. Because the most important thing here is the creative input you're giving the character as author. So people talk about AI itself will potentially only generate mediocrity right now. But if you, the writer, can get your authorial hand all over the prompting and fine tuning of that AI, I think we can generate some really exciting new forms for audiences to get inspired by. So I'm going to leave it there because I know the questions will be far more interesting than anything else I could say here. So thank you very much. And I hand over probably to Amy.
Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed hearing about the challenges and particularly the characterization. It's given me a lot to think about. I think that's a good starting point for our first question. I'd like to ask about creative challenges that any of you have faced during your work with AI tools. I think it's something that came up in Robin, Sarah, and Guy's presentations in particular. So if you've got any thoughts or any reflections on creative challenges that you came up against or you tackled or grappled with during your projects.
Yeah, it won't kill anyone. It's a real problem because it's all been made so vanilla and through safeguarding that actually if you want someone like Darth Vader or any sort of strong character for a murder mystery, it won't let you do it. So there are ways in which we can get around it by fine-tuning our own models, which we do. But that's quite interesting. You know, the idea of having strong characters in a as part of a story is one of the things that we found.
So it just sort of dulls them down, and you can't have strong characters.
Yeah, it'll flag it for warnings.
Okay.
We were working with Steppenwolf, which is a Warner Brothers character from the Justice League franchise, who, if you know your canon, is working for Darkseid, whose goal it is to wipe out the galaxy, and we kept having it flagged for genocide, and it wouldn't create any dialogue for us. So we had to.
You don't want to get flagged for genocide, no.
It's the same with anything that's vaguely sexual, even using the word intimate, asking it to write an intimate scene or describe something that has any level of intimacy, where that word, it just reads as being sort of sexually explicit. It doesn't kind of have any of the sort of the nuance of the kind of the range of intimacies that humans engage in. So then I got that classic response, you know, I'm a language model and I can't help with this question, which I always find very amusing. I quite like it, making it work so you get that response of it sometimes.
I mean, I will echo what others have said and talk a little about the vanilla, but also about a particular recurrent sort of brand of humour that seems to come out of the LLMs at the moment. And whilst we were able to move it somewhat away from that, there was a consistent return to it. So we often had to find new ways of fine-tuning the prompt itself, the prompt injection, to deal with that. So I suppose, yeah, the vanilla and the repetitiveness of the content that was coming out. I mean, there's many more practical challenges, but they were all to do with the running of the kind of body of the character, so the movement of the character, rather than looking at writing. But I think this is such a huge issue, as we're hearing.
Yeah, thank you all. I'm going to move to the Q&A questions we've been asked from the audience. Guy has already given a wonderful answer to this one, but I wanted to open it up to all of you. Could any of you talk more about ethical issues that you grapple with in your creative practice or your thinking around AI? So entering the kind of thorny territory of ethics in its broader sense. Could any of you speak around kind of ethical issues of AI in script writing specifically?
I don't mind starting. And I will preface what I have to say with the fact that I probably can never cover all the things to say on this topic. And one of the reasons that Liminal and Hattrick got involved with the Kai project was because it explicitly was setting out to expose everything about the process, including, you know, problems. So there were moments where the latency was awful and we wanted to expose that. But that included some of the ethical issues around the use of generative AI in the creative industries. And I think what's challenging, of course, is that in order to get the voices of creative people, people who work in arts and culture, to get those voices into the space, you must participate. And whilst participating, you can learn things that you didn't know before about, I don't know, anything from this, whether it's a sustainable act to be using an LLM as opposed to a search or whatever, that then make you question, well, should I be in this space? But I think the longer that the more time that I've spent experimenting with AI, the more I've realized how important it is, especially for artists, to be in this safe sandbox where we are understanding these tools and how to talk about them and what the issues are. I'll highlight, quite aside from, you can hear there's a philosophical question that will always arise. And I think it's important to be involved so that the voice that we have is connected to an understanding of the technology. But there are other issues, like at the moment, it's quite difficult to obviously track where artists' data goes. And we had mocap artists who, it's very hard once you've got movement data going into a system, it's very difficult to track that. So that's one of many examples of how do you, credit people appropriately? How do you protect people's data? Who owns what? Kai as a character is frequently availability checked to speak at conferences. Like, how does that happen? Whose character is Kai? So there are many ethical issues, and I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm going to let other people step in where I've left off or reiterate other things that I've said.
Thank you. Yeah, do any of the other speakers have any thoughts around ethics in its broader sense around AI?
Well, I'd say I encountered, in the way that I worked with it, it's quite obviously very different from the way that Guy and Robin have been working with AI, working in a much more sort of traditional kind of writerly way. But stereotypes, really, I guess, and sort of trying to avoid stereotypes. So, you're putting in a log line or an idea and you'll end up, with, the women characters behaving in a certain way according to certain traditional stereotypes or and I guess that comes out of the sort of comes under the category of quite generic or kind of and one of the problems of pattern recognition, isn't it, is that they are producing outputs that are a result of what's been put in. Data in, data out. So it's that was something you had to I had to overwrite or write around, I suppose. So that was kind of one of the main issues that I came across in my practice, I suppose. Biases, trying to conflate them or work against the biases that it turned out. And then it also questions around how much of the AI content, at what point in the revision and redrafting process does the work become yours again? So if you are taking ideas from AI, and issues around authorship, I guess, and visibility, so if AI does produce something that you quite like, you want to use, how do you acknowledge that if you're going to publish it or use it in some way? Can I just call it mine just because I put the prompt in, or what should I do about that? I think that's still quite a grey area. So how do you kind of credit AI's input in work that you want to publish?
Thank you. That's great. And I see in the Q&A, Guy has signposted to a paper which I think is going to be really useful for this. I'm going to have to wrap up because it is the end of our hour together, which is a shame because I know we could have kept talking for much longer. But I'd like to thank our 4 panelists. It's been great spending time with you, and thank you very much for your diverse experiences and background on this topic, because I think that's what we need to hear from lots of different people. So thank you very much. Thank you for everybody attending. It's been great to have you all. Hopefully we gave you lots to think about, and hopefully the webinar series may return at some point, and we will have time to speak again.
Thanks,
Okay,
Amy.
very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you. Yeah, I know you've got a race off, Guy, as well. So we're just waiting for we've got a
I've
few
got to
more.
go too, Amy, but we'll catch up soon, yeah?
Yeah. Okay, bye.
Yeah, bye.
Great.
Just got a couple more participants in the room still, and then just checking. Okay, I think it's just us now. All the attendees have gone. Yeah, thank you very much, both of you, for speaking. It's been really great to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, well, thanks for the invite. It was nice to find Guy on the call as well, the webinar.
Yeah. Sorry that wasn't clear, but I think
it was lovely. It's just funny to us that we end up, in the same spaces a lot.
Of course, I bet you're always in the same rooms.
And I'm in a meeting with him this afternoon.
Okay.
He's all over my calendar.
You really are connected to Guy. I think what you said, it worked really well. It kind of connected.
Well, it's totally different to the academic approach.